In stock trading, the trend is your friend. Well, what does that mean and why is it important? That's my topic this week in the Stockscores Market Minutes. So why must the trend be your friend? Well, let's first explain what that means. The saying or the cliche in trading, the trend is your friend, revolves around the idea that you want to be a buyer with the trend. If you can imagine, trading is like paddling a canoe on the river. You can paddle with the current or you can paddle against it. And the trend is the current. It's the direction that the market is going. And so if the market is moving up, then it's much easier to make money on the buy side. If the market is moving down, then of course, much easier to make money on the short sell side. But what does that really mean? Why does that happen? Well, within every stock, there are two components of risk that determine where the stock is going to go. So there's the systematic risk and the unsystematic risk. Now, this comes right out of financial textbooks. Another way to say it is there's the alpha factors and the beta factors. The alpha factors are those unique to the company. So if you have a biotech company and they go out and they research and they find a treatment for cancer, that stock is going to go up regardless of what the overall market is doing. Something specific to the company is driving its performance. We call that alpha. The beta component would be the direction of the overall market or perhaps the biotech sector. And so if the biotech sector in general is going up, then most stocks in that sector will also go up. And by the same token, if the overall market, the S&P 500, for example, is generally going up, then most stocks will move up. Now in 2022, most of the stock market was moving down. Perhaps a little bit of strength in some of the commodity sectors, but for the most part, the overall market was moving down. And so it made it difficult to be a buyer of stocks because they were getting pulled lower by the overall market. The beta factor, the market factor, was very strong. And it was only alpha stocks, those stocks trading on their own story, that could go up while the overall market was going down. And we saw that. We see that even every day in trading. There's always some stocks that have alpha. And when I talk about my day trade of the week each week, and I'll do that again at the end of the video, it's almost always in an alpha stock. And I'll tell you later what an alpha stock is characterized by. All right, so when we talk about the trend is your friend, what we're really starting with is an assessment of the overall market and perhaps individual sectors. Where is their general buyer enthusiasm? Because if you can buy a stock in a sector that is doing well, and then even add to that, the alpha factor is positive, well, now you've got two things going in your favor. The metaphor I like to use is boats on a lake or boats on the ocean. There's all these boats out there on the ocean. We call those stocks, okay? That's the comparison. Well, most boats are sailboats. They get moved by the direction of the market. The direction of the market is the wind. So the wind is blowing all the sailboats around in the direction of the wind or in the direction of the market. But in every market, there's also a few motorboats. Motorboats are those that have alpha. They can move despite the direction of the wind. And so if you've got a wind coming from the north, but you've got a stock that wants to go up, perhaps it has a motor and it can go up against the direction of the overall market because it has alpha. Now, ideally, you want to go with the wind and also have a motor. You'd like to have a sail and a motor. So you'd like to have the beta factor in your favor, but also you'd like to have that alpha factor in your favor. All right, so when we talk about the trend as your friend, the idea is do a top-down approach. Where is there strength in the overall market? What sectors are doing well? What sectors are best avoided? And then look for alpha stocks in those sectors. And again, at the end of the video, I'll explain what I mean by an alpha stock and how to find them. What's the characterization of an alpha stock? All right, so now what I want to do is my normal market analysis, but we're going to go a little deeper this week. Now, normally I look at the S&P 500, the Canadian stock market, some commodities, currencies, that sort of thing. We're going to do that as well. But this week I'm going to look at a few more sectors so we can see the direction of the wind. We can see the current, what direction the river is flowing. We have all these metaphors around boating. I'm not sure why that is, but it's very fitting because you get the sense that the market is pulling stocks in one direction or the other, and at the same time there's always going to be those alpha stocks. So let's jump into the Stockscores website, and I'm going to pull up here. The first chart is the semiconductor group. All right, so the symbol is SOXX, and this is an ETF that represents the semiconductor sector. Okay, and so we've got the trend of the market from 2020 until early 2022 was up. And so the beta factor was positive. It was pulling that group higher. Well, early in 2022, the upward trend was broken and we went into a downward trend. And so now it made it very difficult to be a buyer of semiconductor stocks because the trend was down. Now, in the last month, we've seen that downward trend broken after the build of a rising bottom. So that means that the buyers are back in control. The beta factor for the semiconductor sector is positive. And so if you're looking for a place to search for opportunities, semiconductors is a good one. I wouldn't necessarily go out and buy every semiconductor stock, but if you find a semiconductor stock that has a good setup or a good chart pattern, what have you, then it's worth considering because the beta factor is also positive. Okay, let's do a few more and not be quite so slow. Let's do natural gas next. Someone last week asked me to do this. So here's the natural gas sector, and oh boy, is it ugly. The sellers are in control. Now, natural gas had buyers in control, sellers in control, buyers, sellers, buyers, and ultimately broke the upward trend line. Well, the steepest upward trend line was broken there, and then more recently in December, and it's been falling ever since. Now, part of the reason is it's been quite warm in Europe, and so they haven't had as much demand for natural gas. There's always a reason. The thing is, if you wait for the reason, if you wait to read about it in the newspaper or on the financial television channels, you're too late because the market predicts these things long before you hear about it in the mainstream media. And so what you want to watch for are breaks of trend. Well, right now, the natural gas sector is in a negative trend. Now, it's quite overbought. It is due for a little bounce back because it's gone down so sharply, but I really don't see any reason to be optimistic. Now, there was a little bit of strength in natural gas on Friday, and so you may get a little bounce this week. Perhaps it'll be a trade for a day trader or a swing trader, but the long-term picture is still pretty negative. Okay, let's keep going. Let's take a look at wheat. Now, of course, wheat tends to move a lot with what's happening in Ukraine with Russia, and we had a little bit of an escalation last week, and so you see that the price of wheat has broken the downward trend line, but not from a rising bottom. So it's still from a new low, so it's slightly more likely that wheat is going to move up, but the upward trend has already been broken. So you might get a little bit of a rally here in wheat, and food-related stocks might suffer because higher prices in wheat, but generally it's still not a great longer-term chart. All right, let's go to take a look at home builders. So this is heavily influenced by interest rates, and so it's interesting, the upward trend was in place, it was broken January 2022, and then the downward trend was broken basically in January of this year, late December. Right? Rising bottoms are a sign that the buyers are in control. That's optimism. So home builders are actually moving up. And yet if you watch the mainstream media, you'll hear about, recessions coming, higher interest rates are killing the housing market. Well, that's already happened. Interest rates have already gone up. The housing market has already slowed. The stock market doesn't react to what happened last month. It's predicting what the next thing will be. And so the housing market is starting to get better based on this chart. The home building stocks have been moving higher for most of this year so far. All right, let's try technology. XLK is the symbol. You can see upward trend, downward trend broken from a rising bottom. So this is now somewhat positive. It has an uphill battle because it has lots of resistance to deal with, but it does look fairly good. So technology is an area of the market that's not too bad. How about biotech? So biotech, downward trend, build of a rising bottom, broke the downward trend late last year, still building rising bottoms, which is a sign of optimism, has resistance here. We need to break through that. So right now I think it's more of a neutral sideways market, but if we can break through that resistance, then the biotech sector will be worth considering. If instead we break through this floor, then you got to be negative and cautious with biotech. The last one we'll do before I do my regular market analysis is the retail sector. XRT is the symbol, and you can see it was pretty bad for most of 2022, and then starting to improve, building of a rising bottom, downward trend has been broken. It sold off last week, but that may be a buying opportunity as it pulls back to the upward trend line and bounces off of it. All right, so that's a top-down approach, looking at some sectors, and then we can start to look for individual stocks in those sectors that are leading the way. All right, now let's do the normal market analysis, and we'll start with the S&P 500. And much like some of the sectors we've seen, we've got that build of a rising bottom, breaking the downward trend line, looking fairly good. Again, last week, a little bit of weakness, but we haven't broken down the overall trend on the 3-year chart. Now, in the short term, 1-month chart, you can see that in the short term, this upward trend line has just had the market pull back to it. And on Friday, we started to bounce off of that upward trend line. That's what we expect to happen. Be concerned if we break down through it. Okay, so look at the numbers here. This is the SPY. If you start to move down through, say, 404 on the SPY, be cautious. But for now, it looks okay. How about the Canadian market? T.XIU is the ETF for the TSX 60. You can see generally going sideways for a number of months. We're at the top of that little range, building a rising bottom. So it's a good looking market. I wouldn't say it's great. It's got a lot of resistance here to work through, but it's looking better. How about some commodities? So let's take a look at GLD. Gold had a kind of a rough week last week. The last 2 weeks, you can see the weakness there. We've come into resistance. We're getting stuck there a little bit. So that's kind of a neutral looking picture. How about in the short term? You can see the sellers took control and we've been moving lower since. So you want to be fairly cautious with the gold and precious metal stocks right now. How about oil? Let's take a look at BNO. You can see here's the long-term upward trend line and we're just dancing off of it. You see how we keep bouncing off of that? We had an up week last week, but we haven't broken this downward trend line. And so what we want to watch is which line is going to be broken first. Are we going to break the downward trend line and then resume the upward trend long term? Or are we going to break down through this long-term upward trend line? This, of course, is a negative, and if we do this, it's a positive. Keep an eye on it. The momentum is still up, and so I would say it's a better chart than not, but it still needs to hold that upward trend line. All right, US dollar, let's take a look here. UUP had a pretty good bounce the last couple of weeks. You can see the long-term upward trend line right there. We ran away from it and we pulled back to it. Very common that price will do this. So it ran away, it gets overbought, it comes back down, and now it's bouncing off of the trend line. So a little bit of strength in the US dollar, and part of the reason is the US bond market had a little bit of weakness, which means interest rates rose, and this chart is a good representation of interest rates. So you can see there the little jump in interest rates last week. We have an upward trend line like this. We've actually broken that. So I think that interest rates probably go sideways in this range here. They went up a lot, they've pulled back in the bond market a little bit, and I think we're going to see the bond market just sort of go sideways there in the near term. If we break down through this floor, then we're going to have to expect interest rates to fall. And if we break this downward trend line with some enthusiasm, then we may see interest rates rise a little bit. Okay, so that's a little overview of the overall market, and we can now take a look at my ratings on those key sectors. US stocks bullish on both time frames. Canadian stocks long-term neutral, short-term bullish. Gold neutral, long-term bearish, short-term. Had some weakness last week. Oil neutral on both time frames. Same for the US dollar. Bitcoin, same thing there. and interest rates neutral long-term and short-term. All right, now let's take a look at the day trade of the week. At the top of the video, I promised to tell you what is the key to finding alpha stocks. It's actually pretty simple. It's abnormal volume and price gains. So when we're day trading, we can find these stocks by looking for those that are making strong price gains with abnormal volume. And this week's day trade of the week shows that. If we jump to the chart here, you can see that the volume traded on Friday was much greater than on Thursday. So that tells us that something is going on. I have no idea what's going on. I really couldn't care less. What I know is that this tells me that the people who follow this company the closest are excited about something. And I'm sure you could go look at the news and figure out what it is. I don't read news. I just read what the market thinks of the news, and that's why I look at charts. And you can see right here we had our action candle indicator, this little yellow dot, tells us that the buyers are coming in with abnormal strength. And we pick up that with my computer algorithms that we run in Active Live on Stockscores.com's Active Live service every day. So that was the key signal that this stock was likely to go higher. And it did that exactly, rallied very nicely, earning 10 times risk at the height. Now we wouldn't sell at the height, we'd probably sell right here, which was at 6 times risk. What that means is for every $1,000 risked, you make 6 times that, or $6,000. Now when I say $1,000 risk, that's not the size of the position, that's how much you expect to lose if you are wrong. When I trade, I always plan to lose, I don't plan to win, I plan to lose. Being a good loser is how you make money. And so my downside on a trade like this is $1,000, and it worked quite nicely. At the sell signal, it made about $6,000, and at the very height, it was up 10,000, but wouldn't probably sell until it had pulled back a little bit. All right, so that's an overview of the trend. What is an alpha stock? What is a beta stock? How you day trade them. You can take these same principles that I talk about in day trading and apply them to longer term trading as well, swing trading, position trading. It's all the same. You can learn more about my approach to doing that at Stockscores.com in the Learn to Trade area. Hope that you've enjoyed this week's video. If so, click on the like button. If you have some ideas that you would like me to discuss in future videos, this week's topic was based on a question from someone last week, so I always read those comments, and if you have something you'd like me to cover, leave a comment and I will try to get to some of those in future weeks. Hope you've enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next week. Trade well.